Halloween in Ridgewood had always been a big deal. Every year, the entire town turned into a sprawling, festive carnival of scares. From the tiniest front lawns to the largest parks, every corner seemed to burst with eerie decorations and glowing jack-o'-lanterns. But one house always stood out, the grand old house on Willow Street. The man who lived there, Edgar Claremont, had become a local legend. His decorations were the most elaborate in town, hands down. Life-sized ghostly figures floated across his lawn, their tattered white sheets fluttering in the cool October wind. Fog machines shrouded the front yard in thick mist, making it look like something straight out of a horror movie. His windows glowed with flickering candles, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Edgar's house was a must-visit on Halloween night, the final stop for anyone brave enough to make it that far. But there was something else about Edgar's house. Something unspoken but universally felt by everyone in Ridgewood. People joked about it, sure. They called him the master of Halloween, said his obsession with the holiday bordered on unhealthy. Some even claimed they'd seen strange things in his windows after the holiday had passed. Movement, shadows in the night. But no one took it too seriously. It was all part of the fun, right? What the town didn't know, what they never suspected, was that Edgar Claremont's obsession with Halloween was far more than a harmless passion. Every year, on that haunted night, when the streets filled with excited trick-or-treaters, Edgar had a darker plan. He would welcome dozens of kids to his door, handing out candy with a warm smile, his eyes scanning the crowd for just the right one. The unlucky one. This year, Edgar had already made his choice. His gaze had fallen on a boy named Jamie, an 11-year-old dressed in a skeleton costume. Jamie had been by Edgar's house the year before, but this time, he had come alone. Perhaps his friends had dared him, or maybe Jamie just wanted to prove to himself that he wasn't afraid. Whatever the reason, Edgar had watched from his window as the boy stood at the gate, hesitating just long enough for Edgar to smile. He'd been doing this for years, long enough to know how to spot the ones who could be lured inside. There was always one, a child curious enough, bold enough, to step beyond the threshold. And that was all Edgar needed. When Jamie finally made his way to the porch, Edgar opened the door wide, his grin as welcoming as ever. He wore his usual costume, an old-fashioned undertaker's suit, complete with a top hat and a black cloak. His face was powdered a ghostly white, making him look more like one of the figures from his lawn than a living man. "Trick or treat," Jamie called out, though his voice wavered slightly as he glanced past Edgar into the darkened house. "Ah, a brave little skeleton," Edgar replied, his voice smooth and rich. "Come closer, young one. I've saved the best treats for last." Jamie shifted on his feet, glancing back at the empty street. Most of the other kids had already gone home. It was late now, and only a few scattered porch lights flickered in the distance. Ridgewood was quiet, with nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of wind in the trees. I just wanted some candy," Jamie said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Oh, of course," Edgar said, stepping aside to reveal a large, ornate bowl filled with candy. But his hand didn't reach for it. Instead, he gestured toward the shadowed hallway behind him. "But the best candy is inside. I've got something special, just for you." Jamie's brow furrowed and he hesitated. He had been warned, like all kids, about going into strangers' houses. But something about Edgar's tone, about his house, was magnetic. And it was Halloween. Wasn't this the whole point, to be scared? Jamie took a deep breath, gathering his courage, and took a step inside. The house was darker than it seemed from outside, the air thick with the smell of old wood and something else, something that made Jamie's skin prickle. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and the life-sized ghost decorations that filled the room seemed to shift ever so slightly as he passed them, their hollow eyes following him through the shadows. "You really go all out," Jamie said, trying to make his voice sound casual, though his heart pounded in his chest. Edgar smiled, his face barely illuminated by the faint light of flickering candles. "It's all in the details, Jamie. Halloween is my favorite time of year. I like to make it special, unforgettable." Jamie swallowed, his eyes darting around the room. The ghost figures were so realistic, so lifelike, that it made his stomach churn. He reached out to touch one of them, a woman draped in tattered white cloth, her face hidden beneath a veil. His hand hovered just above the fabric, but he pulled back at the last second, feeling a strange chill crawl up his spine. "Do you like them?" Edgar asked, his voice almost a whisper now. Jamie nodded slowly. "Yeah, they're really cool. They were once like you know," Edgar continued. his voice carrying a strange, haunting edge. They came here, curious, excited. And now, they stay with me. Every year, I add one more to my collection. Jamie's breath caught in his throat, his heart suddenly racing. He took a step back, bumping into one of the figures, and for just a moment, he could have sworn it moved, just a slight twitch, like a living thing. The room felt smaller now, the shadows closing in, the air thick and suffocating. "Don't be afraid," Edgar said, his voice low and soothing, as if he were speaking to a child on the verge of sleep. "It's part of the fun. You'll see." But Jamie didn't see. He couldn't. All he felt was the overwhelming urge to get out, to leave. He backed toward the door, his heart thudding in his chest, but the house seemed to stretch and twist around him. The walls grew darker. The floor seemed to fall away beneath his feet. And then, everything went black. The next Halloween, Ridgewood was as festive as ever. Pumpkins lined the streets, children ran from house to house in their costumes, and the whole town buzzed with excitement. But, as always, the true centerpiece of the holiday was the house on Willow Street. Edgar Claremont had outdone himself this year. His lawn was more elaborate than ever, the ghostly figures even more lifelike, their translucent bodies illuminated by the eerie blue glow of hidden lights. Fog rolled across the yard, enveloping the figures in a spectral mist, and the sound of distant, echoing laughter played from hidden speakers. This year, there was a new addition to the display. A boy, dressed in a skeleton costume, stood near the front of the lawn, his face pale and hollow-eyed, his hands outstretched as if beckoning visitors closer. The children who came to see the house marveled at the new figure, whispering to each other about how real it looked, how perfectly crafted it was. "Didn't a kid go missing last Halloween?" one child whispered to his friend as they stood at the edge of the lawn, gazing at the new figure. "Yeah, I think so," the other replied, "but they never found him. Weird, right?" Neither of them could have known the truth. Neither of them could have guessed that the new ghost on Edgar's lawn wasn't just another decoration. But Edgar knew. He always knew. And as the night wore on, as the children trick-or-treated and laughed and screamed, Edgar stood in the shadows of his porch, watching, waiting. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the next one, the next child who would step just a little too close, who would be just curious enough to venture inside. Halloween would come again. The decorations would go up, the lights would flicker, and the fog would roll across the lawn. And there would always be a new ghost waiting to join Edgar's collection.